AJMC August 5th, which we hope many of you can join. It'll be another Zoom virtual thing, and we'll share a little bit more about what that's going to entail at the end of today's conversation. We also want to thank the folks who've been co-sponsoring these discussions, the Tau Center, the Agora Journalism Center, Arizona State, Temple University, and Northwestern's Medill School. We want to follow up today on something that a lot of you from when we started having these conversations have occasionally chimed in to bring our attention to, and that's the really cool possibilities of collaborating between public libraries and journalists. And so that's something, it's something I've been interested in for a while. There's a project called Curious City in Chicago that I followed back in 2016. It was like pre-election 2016, and they were doing work at libraries. And ever since then, I've been thinking about that. And I know many of you are involved in working on projects with libraries. And I think it's something that we'd like to kind of dig into a little bit more. We're going to hear from two people who've been doing this work today, and then we're going to open it up to have a discussion with all of you who've been doing that. We're going to hear in a moment from Judong Marshall, Chief Content Officer for WFAE, about a really innovative project they've been doing in conjunction with libraries and with Report for America in Charlotte. But first, we're going to invite Laurie Putnam, who's been sort of following this intersection of libraries and journalism for a while, to kind of kick us off with a sort of overview of the different kinds of collaborations that have been taking place. So I will pass it over to you, and again, mute myself here. Thanks.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen here. Thank you everyone for being here today when there's so much else going on. What I'm going to try to do is give an overview of just some of the types and examples of collaborations that I've been watching. This is not a comprehensive list, but I think it'll be a good starting point for us. These slides are up on SlideShare, and so if we run out of time to talk about the examples, which I'm sure we will, you can always go back and look at them later. But I hope this will give you kind of a starting point to think about what kinds of collaborations might be possible or effective in your community. So just to kind of ground us here, this is a working definition that I've been thinking about of how do you think about these collaborations. And I see it as librarians and journalists joining forces to bring to their communities new, improved, or different kinds of information services and programs. And that means that each partner has to bring something to the table. That can be a lot of different kinds of things, but there has to be a shared effort and a common goal for these things to work. Some different things to consider as you think about this. I think it's really important to remember that every library, every newsroom, every community is different. And I know you're well aware of the differences between newsrooms. Libraries are also vastly different, and there are a lot of different kinds of libraries: public libraries, university libraries, school libraries, specialized news libraries, like hospital libraries. So that means that a lot of different kinds of collaborations are possible. And it also means that what works in one community may not work in another community. So the best approach is going to depend on the needs of the community first and foremost, and then also the goals of the two partners and the resources that you have available to work with, because I know those resources keep shrinking on both sides. This is a short list of some of the types of collaborations I've been watching and thinking about. Again, it's not comprehensive, but I think it'll give us a starting point, and I want to run through very quickly each one and give you a couple examples that you can explore later if you want to do that. Public buildings are a really big asset for libraries, and I'm seeing a lot of examples of journalists and librarians collaborating on programs from within the library, and also, sometimes even running their entire operation from within the library. And that's what you see in the two examples here. WGBH and the Boston Public Library share a space on a permanent basis, and, well, at least a satellite office for WGBH. And then Nowcast and the San Antonio Library also have a shared space that they use to work together, not just to operate the newsroom, but also to run programs together and to tap into the resources of the people who come into the library so that you can run programs and workshops together. And that's a great thing to do. Community conversations, extremely relevant right now. These kinds of discussions can be hosted in a library building, or they can also be in another community space or even online. The example that I'm showing here is with New Voices in Charlotte with the public library there, where they hosted community conversations that looked at local news needs and invited community input on that. But these conversations can be about anything, any local issues, anything that's relevant to the local community. News and media literacy is also extremely relevant right now, and I'm seeing more and more examples of libraries and newsrooms collaborating to deliver these kinds of programs. In Skokie, there was a program, these examples are really rich collaborations, not just with libraries and journalists, but also with educators, where in Skokie, they created a series called Get a Grip, which was several program series that went direct to the public in the community. And the one in Georgia was more of a train the trainers workshop that again included librarians, journalists, and educators to help train librarians to be able to go out into the community and do programs for them. So both really rich examples. And these all have links in them to more coverage of these examples if you want to go check them out later. We also have people working together directly to respond to community questions. And I know Andrea talked about Curious City. That's a good example. In Kansas City, you see something similar with What's Your Casey question, where the Star and the public library reach out to the community, invite them to ask questions, and then they can research and respond to them together. And then online, Spaceship Media hosts a lot of conversations about issues that can become controversial, and they partner with local libraries to act as trusted resources so that when issues come up or questions come up and people need more information, the librarians, their partners, can go out and research those things and bring back facts, they call them fact stacks, and provide resources and further information that will help ground the conversation and make sure everybody's working with the same basic information. We also have collaborations to actually produce local news. There are lots of different kinds of examples here, but two I like are one in Dallas, where there's a program called Storytellers Without Borders, where high school students are actually trained to become community reporters and to use the library as a resource when they're doing their research in the process of reporting. And I also have seen a lot of examples where librarians become columnists for their local news outlets, writing about sometimes just library issues, sometimes about bigger information issues, which could be anything from privacy to First Amendment issues, censorship, you know, all kinds of things. So librarians are a good resource for that sort of thing too. We also have various kinds of collaborations that involve local histories and archives. And one example I'm listing here in Canada is a pop-up newsroom that was created by the Sprawl in the Calgary Public Library, where they used the newsroom in the library to be able to talk about local history as kind of a pathway to talk about the future of Calgary. And it's a really interesting project. There's a lot more to it than that. So I encourage you to check it out if you're not familiar with that one, because it's a really rich collaboration with a lot of different components. And I also just wanted to mention that a lot of libraries hold local newspapers and all kinds of different news in their collections, and often they will be scanning and archiving historical collections. And I think there are a lot of opportunities that haven't necessarily been tapped yet to be able to start digitizing, or if it's not already digitized, most of them are now, but to archive local news as it happens. And that's more important than ever now because of all the news that potentially could disappear with mergers and acquisitions and just news outlets going away. And archiving, I think, is really important. And librarians are good at that. And finally, academic programs where educators get together to develop and deliver academic programs related to journalism or libraries or both. And an example here is at the University of Kansas, where faculty librarians and journalism educators got together to develop a program on digital content strategy. And the way that ended up running is that it's taught by educators in the journalism department, and there's an embedded librarian in every class. So it was developed together, and now it's being delivered together, which is a cool thing. And that's my list. There are lots more examples out there. I just wanted to give us a starting point. Again, these slides are on SlideShare, and I look forward to hearing more about what you all are doing and what you're thinking about and what you're interested in. So I will stop there.
Thank you, Laurie. We really appreciate that. That's a great overview, and a good place to hand over to Judon to share your example, kind of as it fits into one of those categories there. And I will just hand it over to you.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, good. So give me 1 second to get my screen to cooperate. So just a little bit about me. I've been a journalist for more than 30 years. I am at WFAE, the NPR station here in Charlotte. I've done some startup co-founding and also spent the bulk of my career at the Washington Post and was a consultant for some chain news operations and some local independent news operations around engagement primarily, but also around digital strategy and news. And before I go any further, I have to give a shout out to my wonderful partners at the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library here, Seth Irvin, who runs he's the Chief Innovation Officer there, Martha Yesevich, who oversees community engagement, and Jenny Gaspauer, who's on the foundation side of the library and has not only loaned her support to our initiatives, but also for our Report for America initiative, stepped up and provided the funding in order for us to do that. So the work that we do would not be possible without these three, and I'm extremely grateful to have them in our community working alongside us in these initiatives. So why do we partner with the library? You've heard some of that already from Laurie, but I'll talk about where we align with Charlotte Mecklenburg in particular. You know, when you look at the mission of WFAE and the mission of the library, there's a lot of synergy and alignment there. We want to create journalism that informs, enriches, and inspires, and then we want to create spaces for the community to come together, to share ideas, to talk about critical issues. And it's really aligned with the library's mission to improve the lives and build strong communities. And also they're convening, they're leading conversations, they're helping people learn and gain more knowledge about important topics. In addition, when you look at the trust that we both have with our communities, you know, it's similar. For NPR as an entity and WFAE specifically in our community, we hear time and time again that people really trust us. They trust our commitment to the community. They trust the accuracy of the news that we provide. NPR in both external and internal surveys often comes up as one of the most trusted news organizations in the country and also in the world. And then the library, the county did a recent survey of residents, and 99% of residents said that they viewed the library as a trusted institution. So, you know, so we like to leverage that trust in bringing people together for our initiatives. But we also have a pattern of partnership with the library. The RFA is not our first time working with them. We are part of the Charlotte Journalism Collaborative. Liza, who is on this call, is one of the people who helped facilitate that for us. It's a solutions journalism approach to reporting. The library has been a key partner in that. There are 9 members, and in the library's role with us, they help co-host events with us. So they create that shared space that we can come to and that we can bring the community to. Laurie mentioned one of our initiatives where we brought people in to talk about their news and information needs. And then they also host our website. So we wanted a shared space where all of the content that the collaborative was producing could live, that, you know, brought it all together. And the library is that nice kind of, you know, independent partner where all of the news stories could live. And then the library itself is a resource to us. They provide research. Seth is an equal partner in terms of brainstorming, in terms of leading conversations and weighing in on content decisions. So we really trust and value them. In addition, at WFAE, we have been doing a series of workshops with them. Last year, about a year and a half ago, we did a big Queen City PodQuest that was really designed to elevate the voices of people in our community that you don't normally hear from. And so in that, we did a call out. We received more than 400 responses to that call out. We had 36,000 people vote, and more than 100,000 people viewed the results and the entries that came through that call out. And so we were really excited about that, and we thought long and hard about how to evolve that, you know, in terms of our initial goal, which was to amplify diverse voices. What we found in that PodQuest was that there was a lot of interest, but some of the dynamics we see play out when we talk about equity played out in that kind of open call for ideas. So the people who were able to build stronger networks were the people that you would assume, right? People who were very influential in the community, people who worked in institutions where there were large networks. And so we saw a lot of the ideas that came through more diverse entrants kind of get lost in that momentum. And so going forward, we wanted to figure out how could we meet the need of the community? How could we equip more people to tell their own stories? And how could we make that more equitable in terms of reaching diverse audiences? So I reached out to the library, told them what we wanted to do, and told them that we specifically didn't want to do this initiative for the current WFAE audience. It's great if we had overlap, but we wanted to go branch by branch and do outreach to the patrons of the library who were coming into those specific branches so that we could assure geographic, economic, age diversity across that. And so through that engagement, we did 2 in-person workshops before COVID became a real issue here. And so these photos are a representation of the folks who showed up in those 2 in-person workshops. And we've since done 8 virtual sessions where, you know, people are signing on and we're doing Zoom sessions with them to give them this training. We've had more than 400 people attend so far. And then this next phase of this is we're going to do a boot camp, which will take that initial learning to the next level. We'll have applications from among these original workshop folks, and then we'll do 8 weeks of really intensive training about podcasting and marketing and developing and monetizing their ideas. So we're really excited about that. And again, happy that the library was eager to partner with us on it. So now to talk about Report for America, which is the big initiative. Our Report for America staff members just started today. It's their first day, so we're excited to get this underway. But we've been meeting and planning and talking about this for months with our partners. In this case, it's the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library, but it's also the Digital Public Library of America. Through this initiative, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, we're going to be embedding journalists in the library with the goals of helping to better understand and meet the news and information needs of the community, to engage residents through forums, programs, and exhibits, and to build out that news and information set across our partner sites and also Wikipedia. For Report for America, we looked at what made the most sense in terms of a library beat. So we came back and settled on the local civics beat. We think the way that our city is set up and our governmental structure, we hear time and time again questions from people who don't really understand how things work here. We have a mayor, we have a city manager, we have a county commission, and each of them have different roles in managing the city and approving the way things happen. And often our mayor gets a lot of questions that she is not in a position to actually make any decisions about. And so part of that will just be demystifying Charlotte and Mecklenburg County for people. And then we'll also look at census outcomes and other things, including coverage up to and through the Republican National Convention, which is slated to be here in August. For the team, there are 2.5 people. So there's a reporter, there's a community editor, and then there's a Wikipedia coach who's from DPLA. And that person will work with the reporter and community editor to have them think about, as they create the reporting for WFAE, and sort of the aggregation and research for all of our partners, how those things can then be turned into Wikipedia entries that will serve as sort of a more broader approach to the news and information that we create. So it will have that three-pronged approach there. And then the team will be supported by the audience engagement team at the library that's run by Martha, and by the news and digital team at WFAE. And our goal for the reporter and the editor is to rotate through the various branches around the county. So this is a map of where all of those branches exist throughout our county. And we want them to understand what the community wants to know based on geography, based on income, based on ethnicity, age, and gender. We want to make sure that we reach as diverse group as possible. And so the real goal is for them to be out in the community, you know, post social distancing, to have those face-to-face conversations with the community. And then lastly, I think my slide got lost here, but I wanted to, give me 1 second, I'm gonna stop and reshare this. Sorry, still didn't pop in. So I had another slide to talk about additional things we're talking about. So we do have a FAQ City, which is our version of Curious City, or some of the other things that you heard about. And in that conversation, we take questions directly from the community, and we worked with the library to answer some of those questions. We routinely work with their historian and residents to get questions answered, but then we also work with their researchers in the Carolina room to have them answer questions from the community about Charlotte in the larger region. We also are in the process of designing a community storytellers network to teach people how to gather and create stories, and working with the library as a home base for that, but also as a place that can capture some of those stories and archive that. So we're really looking forward to that as well. And then Seth and I have been talking about imagining ways to create a podcast together for K-12 students, so that, again, we're helping them understand the civic process, how to be informed and engaged citizens, etc. So there's a lot of good things happening, and we're excited that they're partnering with us on those. And I will end it there. My slides are also going to be available, so Andrea can share those after this call.
Thank you. That's amazing. That is such a multifaceted project. It's really helpful to hear all that. I know, Liza, you were involved in this project a little bit. Did you want to say, before we turn it over to the Q&A with the group, did you want to share a little bit about how you were involved in this from the Solutions Journalism Network?
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Andrea. At the Solutions Journalism Network, I run this initiative called the Local Media Project, of which Charlotte is a part. And we help communities to build collaboratives of news organizations with a solutions journalism perspective, so that they can transform and reinforce the local media ecosystem. And we highly, highly recommend that they look beyond just news organizations to be part of the collaborative. So our original project was in Philadelphia. The Reentry Project, and Temple continues to be an incredibly valued partner. We do not have a library in Philadelphia, but Charlotte was our first experience, and of course we become spoiled by this, because as Judon has pointed out, Seth is really quite the visionary person, and has made it so clear what added value a library can bring in terms of a collaborative of news organizations. So we are launching, and we have launched other collaboratives since then. We're encouraging at the moment Northeast Ohio to look at the Cleveland Public Library as a partner, and the Akron I think it's the Summit County Public Library, which would be the library serving Akron. But I firmly believe that we don't know what news organizations would look like in 10 years. They could look very different from what they look like now. And who knows, maybe the new news organization or one model for a new news organization could be Library Plus, or the News Library, or the Library News. So we hope that our experiments, as we are proceeding with the collaboratives, we can explore more and more what the libraries can mean to a collaborative and can mean as a player in the local news media ecosystem. And Judon is already ahead of me with other things that she's thinking of trying that we haven't yet looked at in with other collaboratives. But the sky is the limit, obviously.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have a pretty small group today, so I think we're going to just have a discussion amongst ourselves rather than do the breakout groups. If that gets a little unwieldy, then we can shift gears, but just because today, given everything going on, it's a little bit smaller than normal group. And I know many of you are actually involved in some really cool work, and I'd like you to have a chance to share with everybody as well. So I think we'd like to kind of open it up to questions, first of all. I don't see anything in the chat. If anybody wants to jump in, they can. I'm going to ask a question to Judon, if you don't mind. I'm curious how, when you have these folks rotating around to the different branches, how are they going to kind of assess the information needs of communities? Do they have like a kind of a standard practice or a strategy for doing that, or how are you kind of thinking about that?
So one of the things that we are planning to do is a survey first, that we want to send out just across the library system with some core questions that we want folks to answer. And so we want to sort of equip the reporters to key into some of the trends that they hear out of that survey, so that they have a way to engage people without just having it be cold. We have done some pop-ups with the library in the past with our FAQ City. So we had our host of that go out to one of the branches, set up a table. We had a little spinny wheel that we put out front so that people could just spin and ask a question or submit questions that they wanted the reporter to answer. And we had a lot of engagement around that. So we're thinking about ways to, as the reporters are stationed in the library, to just organically draw people to them, but then giving them some blueprints for how to reach out and strike up those conversations so that it's productive for them as well.
Cool, that's very cool. Oh, I see, Mike, you have your hand up.
So I can unmute myself. Mike Wassenaar from Alliance for Community Media. I wanted to hear more about the idea behind your Community Storytellers Network, what the inspiration was, and really kind of what you're thinking as you're cultivating that community of storytellers. Because it kind of parallels other work that I see across the country with my membership, but I'd like to kind of deepen that practice. So I'm really kind of curious about that.
Well, for me, so a lot of this comes out of my own background, right? I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, but I'm originally from New York. And the thing that struck me when we moved to Charleston was that there were stories that were in the community that I just didn't know about, right? The way that people lived, which was a lot different from the way we lived in New York, I just found shocking. And, and as a child wondered, why didn't I know about this? And then as I grew up, I was there until I went off to college. I just found, and we in our home got the newspaper every day. And every day we would read the newspaper, and I never saw stories that reflected the community I lived in. And so there were always these multiple narratives, right? The one that we would see that was a representation of how the news institutions saw us, and then what was happening on the ground every day. And so coming into WFAE with the PodQuest, and now with a lot of the training that we're trying to do, I acknowledge that newsrooms are ill-equipped to tell all of the stories that need to be told. So what would that look like if we made the community a real partner in the storytelling, if we gave them the tools, and if we could then curate from among the stories that they tell things that we want to amplify or build on. And so the first goal is, let's show you how to do this yourself so that you're not waiting for a newsroom to tell this story. And then let's think about ways that we can partner going forward.
Thank you for explaining that. That's a great question. Also, thanks, Mike, for sharing the resource that you shared in the chat. We'll share this chat with everybody in case we want to look it up later. And if you're having a hard time getting access to a paywall, looks like a journal thing, like send us a message and we can try to help you out.
It's a professional journal. I'll reach out to Colin. The thing that's good about that study is he and his researcher looked at 10 practices of partnership with libraries and community media centers around the country on media literacy and production work. And he's have a series of sort of academic recommendations for deepening the practice. So I'll ask him about the paywall, but it's a recent article. It's 2 years ago.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that.
And personally, that's great too. Like, I'm interested in hearing your stories and your experiences because we're learning as we go. So as much as we're trying to do that's experimental, I definitely want to know what other people are finding success with in this area.
And Mike, Anya had a great question. Are there international examples in that? Do you know by chance?
You know, it's interesting. In our field, there's a lot more research on international work for like democracy building,
yeah,
and civic structure. And we always apparently assumed that democracy was all taken care of here in the United States. So there isn't a lot of academic research, particularly on U.S. practice. Really interesting. A lot of academic studies been sort of driven by international aid work for democracy building post 89, right? So you know there are some studies about international practice out there, but I'm not an expert on it. But I can direct it to Colin if you want, because he's actually studying a lot of this, because he's now the editor of the Journal of Community Informatics. He just took that over, so I think he's got lots of inReach.
That'd be great. I mean, I think I would be very curious to see that too.
Yeah, and he's actually a very good person to talk to about like library partnership and the like. It's he's kind of a believer in that type of media practice. So yeah. Cool.
And Laurie had the very good point that you could probably find these things in your library database. So it's a good reminder to all of us. Oh, Anya, Colin's last name is, I think, in the chat. Colin Ryan Smith, up above. Other folks have questions for Judon and Laurie in particular, or just anything that you're working on that you want to share. I know some of you have done work with libraries before, so if you have something you kind of want to share, some lessons that you've learned along the way, that'd be great.
Well, while we're waiting for people to chime in, I wanted to throw a question to Laurie and Judon. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about, obviously things are really, really even worse now financially for local news organizations across the country because of COVID. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how those economic circumstances affect the pursuits of these kinds of collaborations, because on the one hand, I could sort of see they're making those kinds of collaborations more necessary than they were before because local news organizations are even more resource strapped than they were before. On the other hand, I could also see it making it more difficult for them to pursue those kinds of collaborations for the same reason. And so I would just love to hear the two of you talk about how you're finding news organizations sort of overcome those obstacles so that they can make these kinds of collaborations happen, which I would assume would end up having a positive impact in terms of what they're able to actually deliver.
Yeah, so I can talk for my organization. I will say, so I arrived at WFAE 3 years ago and immediately wanted to do some of the initiatives with the collaborative initiatives with the library and other organizations, and was not able to do some of them for lack of resources. So we set out to pursue a lot of grants to let us do that. Weren't able to get a lot of the grants because, the sort of nature of grants, right, is that the more people know you and know your work, the easier it becomes to get some of these grants. And so WFAE just wasn't on the radar of anyone at that time. And so I just decided we're going to do what we can with the resources we have. So we really stretched ourselves to do things like the PodQuest and some other collaborative initiatives, because we knew it was important to demonstrate what we could do and then demonstrate the value of doing those things, right? Because everybody wants to know about what the impact, what those outcomes are going to be before they're comfortable in investing. And so that's what we've tried to do. For Report for America and embedding the reporter, we would not have been able to do that without the Library Foundation stepping up to say, you know, we'll take care of the match on that. So we already had another collaborative, which we had dedicated our resources to. So they really stepped into the gap for us. And now we're jointly fundraising for additional matches to get those folks through the whole year. But that was really critical in order to do that. You know, I'm a firm believer that this work is so key that we have to be committed to it no matter what the finances. If we fall back into we're journalists only bubble, we don't do engagement, you know, being in the community in this way is not important to us. I think the long-term organization suffers, the value of what we do suffers, right? Because in order to serve communities, we have to fully understand those communities that we're trying to serve and making sure that their voices are part of that conversation. These are the things that help us do that. And so it's as important to have these initiatives going as it is to have more reporters in the field.
We've got a couple good questions in the chat. First from Sabrina, do any of you include getting communication tools and resources in your programs? Devices, laptops, smartphones, tablets for community participatory journalists and ISP subscriptions that are at a level to support media making at home? Interesting question. Any, Judon, is that something that you guys have included in yours, or anyone else? Go ahead.
Yeah,
sorry.
so when we do some of these, can you hear me? When we do some of these initiatives, we try to build in a resource budget. So for instance, when we did the Queen City PodQuest with the community, we thought it was important that we whittled it down to a group of 5 finalists. And for those finalists, we provided microphones. We basically provided a little recording kit. We paid for memberships to some other organizations that would help support them in podcasting. And then we made sure that we did it in a way that it wasn't a financial burden to them. So we talked to the lawyers and to the accountants about how do we give them this and it not become a tax burden, right? Because the last thing we want to do is to talk about creating equity, you know, and bringing in people who may be marginalized, may be less advantaged, and then create a burden for them. And so we were very conscious about trying to do those. Often when, you know, with the Storytellers Network, we're looking at the same thing, right? Like what amount of that should be dedicated to equipment, maybe for a core group, can we provide the training without adding that burden? And we always try to give resources. So even if it's not hardware or something that you have to go out and buy, we are very careful to create like guides to best practices. Here's where you can find things. And the other thing I will say is that our library has podcasting kits that you can check out. And so we've made that like a centerpiece of what we've done. Even before we were partnering with the library, when we did the initial PodQuest, we pointed to the resources of the library and told people how they could access those things.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, that a lot of bigger libraries actually have studios in the library that are available in a maker space or some other kind of space where people can go in when the building is open. Anyway, a lot of libraries are still closed, but sometimes you can actually go into the library and use that space for recording, and that's another possible way to work that out. I also just wanted to comment on the question about finances, because I know the issues in newsrooms are really, really tough right now, but libraries are not exactly flush with resources either, especially since the pandemic. And so many communities have had their budgets cut, and librarians are often furloughed as well and don't know whether or when they're going to be able to go back. So I think we need to think, at least at this moment, we need to think about ways we can initiate partnerships that maybe don't involve a lot of money. And money is just one resource. Sometimes it's time, sometimes it's the space, you know, and just reaching out to the community in a way that doesn't involve a lot of money. And there are really simple ways to get started on a partnership. I love everything that's going on in Charlotte, but Charlotte is like the poster child for everything you could possibly do, and it's just a wonderful long-term collaboration. But if that seems daunting, you can start a lot simpler and just do what you can and what's right for your community and just build from there.
We've got a lot of good questions and comments in the chat right now. Amira, did you want to just, you have a kind of a big general question about engaging your community. Did you want to jump in there and kind of throw that out to folks?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm on my phone, so I'm not sure if that's clear or not. So I'm a multimedia journalist based in Louisville. And I cover mainly immigrant communities, and I know for a fact there is more than the immigrant communities. A lot of the minority communities, their stories are not out there, and even if there is, it's probably a very small part of it in the oral history archive. But journalists are mainly in majority white people, and the angle and the stories that come is really from their perspective. So I was interested on this workshop, particularly to learn how other people done it outside of here. How can it be done? Where to start from? I've worked with the oral history people before, but I'm trying to figure out what is the best way to actually create something like this that would help even journalists that are not colored people, but they can actually report from the community, not from their presence in different places and different events, especially what's happening now. It's very important that the story comes from the community.
That's a really important and big question. And this whole sort of series of discussions that we've been having, I think, address, or is related to this question. I'd also I'd encourage you to join us for our August 5th thing. We certainly can talk many times before then, but I think that'll be part of that conversation as well. But do any of you want to speak to that? Any of you want to share your thoughts for Amira?
I just add, Amira, because I definitely share your perspective on how stories are traditionally told through media. And one of the things that I would say is that you don't need the media institution in this regard to do that work. You could go directly to the local library and ask, would they be willing to help curate and house those stories as they're being told? And I would be surprised if you wouldn't find somebody in that institution who would be willing to help with that initiative. And I'm sure there are other journalists in your community that if you wanted to bring in like a group of journalists to just talk to residents about sharing those narratives and how to get started, right? You could do something that's kind of very, on the ground first to just kind of get some momentum. You could also find a core group of residents to work with. We also have the benefit in Charlotte of working with NC News Voices, and that whole initiative is really about breaking down the barrier between media organizations and the community. And so, Alicia Bell, who oversees that, is a great resource. And part of her, she comes from the world of activism. And so part of that was just bringing people together to talk to them about how they were or were not being served and letting them raise their voices. And so now we have a group of community members who are very engaged in partnering with media. You could find somebody like Alicia in the activism world who could help facilitate those kinds of conversations as well. But, like Andrea and Laurie were saying, work with the tools at your disposal. It won't be perfect, but it's just get started. Even if it's 2 people, 3 people in the room, you'd be surprised how that will grow over time.
And I would just add to that, if you haven't already, I would start by just reaching out to your local library director and just having that conversation, find out what they are doing, because they're probably thinking about a lot of the same things. libraries tend to be supported and trusted by people who use them, but your librarian is also thinking about, how do I reach the people who don't use the library or don't know about the library? And they may be thinking about programs that they want to do for outreach, and there might be ways that you can brainstorm together and accomplish your goals at the same time and reach those communities that maybe neither one of you is reaching right now.
Great. I know we could talk more about that topic, but I just wanted to acknowledge a few things in the chat. Ashley has a great example of sort of troubleshooting with their work with the library, that she mentioned how they had issues with access and they created a temporary card for people to have access to online services. I'm going to kind of go through these a little quick because we're a little low on time, and when we have time at the end, we can jump back to them. Fiona raised a really important question. Some of you have been kind of chiming in on that. Fiona, do you want to just share your question in case anyone else wants to jump in on it?
I just wanted to know, hi, I was wondering, since we're among friends, a sort of real talk question about what are some frequent kind of reasons you get told no or you get resistance if you're trying to start from scratch in pursuing some kind of library newsroom partnership, whether the no is coming from the library institution or the newsroom, and are there ways to kind of go into the conversation prepared for that, so that we know how to sort of make it go a little smoother?
I ran into a barrier on a project I want to talk about, and I can't say that I solved it, but this is a barrier that you may want to do services that are to a particular branch or a particular regional community, and then the system that doesn't want to provide the service because they can't provide it to every branch. So there's a scaling question and a applicability question that sometimes pops up with library systems. And really the question is the extent to which the library system wants to specialize services based upon geographic location or not. And that's a hard one, frankly, because then it's like this sort of this top-down question or bottom-up question in terms of how services are derived and are responding to the needs of people. I've run across that in Minneapolis, particularly. St. Paul was very, very different. St. Paul was a bottom-up system. So working with the branches was very, very easy, and they wanted to encourage local responsiveness. So this ends up being this sort of question of how you're asking the leadership to be responsive to what are really, really hyper local needs, as opposed to the needs of the constituency or the taxpayer that they have to serve. And I don't know how to deal with that really, really well. I can just tell you that it meant that working in Ramsey County was easy and Hennepin County was hard.
Interesting. Max, I know you do some work in libraries. Do you want to share your sort of troubleshooting suggestions that you mentioned?
Yeah, and I definitely echo everything that everyone else has been saying. What we found has been really helpful for some of our projects is by starting out by focusing on a couple of different branches as like a pilot phase, so that it helps everybody, whether it's the folks on the library side or the folks on the organizing side, figure out what kinds of staff is needed to run either a short-term or a longer-term ongoing series. We found that different library systems have had different levels of community connection. So some branch staff are very active and have, comprehensive lists of community contacts to reach out to, and others are brand new. And especially as folks are shifted around within larger systems, being able to find folks who have that kind of local connection and who are able to kind of become advocates for the program or project within that neighborhood has been really helpful. And then it's a good way to set, what we've done is kind of focused on specific neighborhoods or a series of different neighborhoods for a 6-month or a year-long kind of initial project, and then say, like, all right, we know that this has worked well here in the Bronx and Manhattan and Staten Island. What would it take to expand it out to Brooklyn and Queens, and to be able to do that with more branches within one specific New York Public Library system, for example?
Laurie, did you want to say something on this before that I?
Yeah, I was just going to add, to Fiona's question, since we're among friends, one thing that I would just be aware of is that when you work with libraries, there is probably going to be an awareness of the gap in trust between libraries and newsrooms. And so that's something you're going to have to discuss really openly and honestly with the people you work with, because I have seen in some cases that there's a little caution on the library side about how do we present this to the public, you know, coming in as partners and deal with that public perception about journalism that's out there these days with the lower trust level. So that's something that is just worth being aware of, and knowing that you really need to have a good conversation with your contacts about that and figure out how you're going to present the partnership and do it in a way that it's going to elevate the trust level of the journalists along with the libraries.
Judon, did you experience any difficulty on the newsroom end of people being like, why are you going to work with a library? Or is that just sort of accepted?
No, I think we definitely have our challenges. I mean, you know, we are, you know, we're a radio station at our core, and coming in 3 years ago, we weren't very much in the digital space. We weren't doing much in the engagement space beyond like our public conversations around big topics. And so a lot of this was really culture shock for the newsroom. And, you know, there was a lot of questioning of, well, why this and why that? And do we have the resources? And even from some of the other executives in the organization, you know, like you'd see those eyebrows go up about, oh, well, that's interesting. How does that help us, right? So I'm fortunate that I'm in a position at the organization where I can just say, trust me, right? But what I've said to my staff and what I say to other people as they think about this, that my great failure will be if I left WFAE tomorrow and the culture of WFAE didn't embrace this work, right? That if it's just based on me and my ability to create a relationship with Seth or Martha or somebody else at the library, and from either of our organizations, if it rests solely within that one person, then we failed to really do what we needed to do in order to better serve our communities. And so I try to demonstrate through success why it's important, right? But sometimes you have to go a little stealth first just to get some things done so that you can say, hey, so we were doing this thing and look at what happened, right? And so that's how we've ended up building support and building enthusiasm for the newsroom. And we were on the collaborative journalism call, you know, a week and a half ago, where one of the reporters in the newsroom joined me for that. And he was saying, yeah, when all of this started, you know, there was a lot of resistance to it. And now we can't imagine not doing these collaborations and not being involved in this kind of work. So it will change over time, but I think you have to go into it knowing you might have to move in silence first just to like build momentum and get some things done. But then your real goal is to change the culture as you go.
Only change the culture. That's, we're all grateful that that you're in a position that you're able to do that. That's pretty amazing. I know we're running low on time, but I wanted to acknowledge Meryl from the Queen's Memory Project. Did you want to share anything about the work you've been doing? Thanks for sharing the link in the chat.
Sure. So I'll just say very briefly, you know, Max mentioned in the chat that usually a lot of partnerships with big urban libraries maybe don't fail, but have trouble because there's so much bureaucratic red tape. And for what we've been doing, we launched this totally remote archiving project to make a archive in real time of stories about life in the pandemic in Queens, which, you know, as we've heard so many times, has been the epicenter of the epicenter. And we would never have been able to do that under normal circumstances. Amira is one of our volunteers. Hi, Amira. Doing remote oral history interviews. And it's, you know, it's been an experiment for our library and for our program. I only joined in December, but I think there's never been a single remote oral history interview recorded prior to this point. And now we have, I think, at least 50 collected. So as someone else pointed in the chat too, we have a chance right now to experiment. And I think going forward with the questions about budgets and staff numbers, who knows what is going to happen at the end of the month here in New York with the libraries and with everything. But it's really heartening, at least, to see that there is real interest in doing this type of work. And for journalists who want to partner, I think finding the staff who's doing some kind of local responses, that may be a good place to start. I think branches will be different, locations will be different, but speaking for a library system that has 65 physical locations, look for the program people who are doing some work. They could be the entry point.
Thank you so much. So I think we're gonna probably need to wrap up now, but this has been really, really valuable to hear everybody's work and experiences, and I wish we could talk longer. But I want to especially thank Judon and Laurie for putting together those great presentations, which we'll make sure to share with everybody when we send around a follow-up link. And we'll also share the videos, and we'll send around also the information about the August 5th event. Jake, did you want to do a real quick plug for that on sort of the headline topic for it?
Yeah, sure. So very quickly, we've got this August 5th thing coming up, and it's going to be touching on a lot of what we've been talking about. It's going to be specifically focused on making a distinction between efforts within engaged journalism to improve the quality of news and efforts within engaged journalism to improve the economic prospects of news. So we've got sort of like a strict division between those two conversations within the panel, but we're obviously also expecting that there's going to be some overlap in between as well. And we've got really interesting people that are coming to talk about efforts that they're pursuing to sort of get to the answers within those two questions. So we're really, really excited about it. We'll send out a link with the program that we just posted. And yeah, we really hope to see you all there. And just to echo what Andrew was saying, thank you all so much for taking the time for this. Judon and Laurie, thank you so much for taking the time to participate in this. This has been great. It's also just been such a welcome, nice conversation to be having. So I really, really appreciate it. And this is a very small thing, but actually your backyard is like I'm so envious of it. I'm in Phoenix, it's 110 degrees here. All I see is just like sunlight and desert landscape. So to see all those trees in the background is like completely making my day. So I'm glad that your background made an appearance today. Yeah. So thank you all again for showing up and for participating in this conversation. We really appreciate it.
Thank you
for
all.
having
Thank
me.
you.
Bye.
Take care. You have a great day. Stay safe. Be well, everybody.